Today, we're talking about one of the most incredible figures in all of history, Napoleon Bonaparte. This is a guy who, from the chaos of a revolution, literally redrew the entire map of Europe. It's a story that's got everything: unbelievable genius, ambition that knew no bounds, and, in the end, a failure so big it changed the world. So that leads us to the big question, right? How did one man do all of that? And how did it all come crashing down so spectacularly? All right, let's get right into it. To really get a handle on the emperor, you first have to understand the general. You have to see how he grabbed control of a nation that was in total turmoil. So our story really kicks off in 1799. Picture this: a young, super famous general, Napoleon Bonaparte, has just gotten back from his campaign in Egypt. He returns to a France that is just exhausted. Years of revolution have taken their toll. The government, this five-man committee called the Directory, is seen as totally corrupt and useless. The whole country is just desperate for some stability, for a strong leader. The stage was absolutely set for someone to step in. And you know what? Napoleon didn't waste any time. In November of 1799, in what we now call the Coup of 18 Brumaire, which is just a fancy name for the date on the revolutionary calendar, he pulls off this swift, brilliant takeover. He gets rid of the Directory, and in its place, he sets up a new government with himself at the top as First Consul. And let's be clear, that title basically gave him the power of a dictator. Just like that, France had a new boss. The speed of his rise is just mind-blowing. He grabs power in 99. By 1802, he actually manages to make a temporary peace with his biggest enemy, Britain. But that peace, it was never gonna last. It was so fragile. And sure enough, just a year later, it all falls apart, and Europe is plunged into the Napoleonic Wars, a conflict that would basically define the next decade. So, with France locked down, Napoleon turns his eyes outward to the rest of Europe. And what came next? Well, it was a string of military victories so incredible, so complete, that they honestly seemed almost impossible. Just look at the Ulm campaign in 1805. Napoleon's army, his famous Grande Armée, moved so fast and with such amazing strategy that they completely surrounded an entire Austrian army before the Austrians even knew what hit him. And the result? 27,000 soldiers surrendered. A lot of them didn't even put up a fight. This wasn't just winning a battle. This was a total masterclass that just stunned his enemies. And this slide, this really shows you the fundamental problem Napoleon had. On land, he was an absolute genius. The Battle of Austerlitz is considered his masterpiece. He just crushed the combined armies of Austria and Russia. But at sea, totally different story. The British Royal Navy completely wiped out his fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar, and that meant he could never, ever invade Britain directly. He was the master of the land, but Britain was the undisputed king of the waves. His enemies just kept underestimating him. So when Prussia got brave and formed a new coalition against him, Napoleon didn't just beat them. He completely annihilated their famously tough army in 2 different battles, on the same day. It's incredible. Just a few weeks later, he's parading his troops right through Berlin's Brandenburg Gate. Okay, so since he couldn't invade Britain, Napoleon thought, well, I'll just starve them out economically. He creates something called the Continental System. It was basically a giant continent-wide embargo. He ordered every nation he controlled to stop trading with the British, hoping he could just wreck their economy from the inside. This run of victories was just insane. In 1805, he demolishes the Third Coalition at Austerlitz. In 1806, he crushes Prussia. And by 1807, after beating the Russians too, he's standing on a raft in the middle of a river with the Tsar, signing the Treaty of Tilsit. This treaty literally carved up Europe between them. Napoleon gets the West, Russia gets the East. This was it. He was at the absolute peak of his power. You know, they say it's often at the very height of your power that you make your biggest mistakes. And for Napoleon, 2 huge blunders would start to unravel everything he had ever built. His downfall really starts with 2 fatal mistakes. First up, Spain. He just arrogantly invades, throws out their king, and puts his own brother on the throne. He thought it'd be a quick job, but instead, the Spanish people fought back in this brutal, drawn-out guerrilla war. It became known as the Spanish ulcer, just a constant bleeding wound that sucked his empire dry of men and money. And then came the second, even bigger mistake. He decided to invade Russia. And he did not do it by halves. Napoleon put together the biggest European army anyone had ever seen, the Grande Armée, more than 600,000 men strong, and marched them east. Just think about that number. It was an invasion on a scale that was almost unimaginable, and it was all built on pure overconfidence. But here's the thing, the Russians just refused to play by his rules. Instead of fighting him in one big battle like he wanted, they just kept falling back, deeper and deeper into their huge country. And as they retreated, they burned everything. Crops, villages, you name it. This was their scorched earth policy, and it left Napoleon's massive army with absolutely nothing to eat or use for shelter. The human cost was just beyond belief. When that brutal Russian winter finally hit, the whole campaign turned into a complete catastrophe. Starvation, frostbite, constant attacks from the Russians, they just destroyed his army on that long, horrible retreat. Of the 600,000 soldiers who marched into Russia, less than 100,000 made it out alive. It was a disaster on a scale Europe had never witnessed, and his empire would never, ever recover from it. So, this brings us to the final act. With the Grande Armée completely shattered in the snows of Russia, Napoleon's enemies all across Europe could smell blood in the water. For the first time, they all came together with one goal: to finish him once and for all. A huge new coalition, the sixth one, formed against him. We're talking Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, all of them. In 1813, they finally trapped him at a place called Leipzig. In what was the biggest battle in Europe before World War I, they call it the Battle of Nations for a reason, he was finally decisively defeated. The myth of Napoleon's invincibility was gone, shattered forever. After that, the end came fast. In 1814, they forced him to give up his throne and send him to this little island called Elba. But, and you can't make this up, he escapes. In 1815, he comes back to France and rules for what's called the 100 Days. It's one last crazy gamble. Europe gets its armies together one last time, and at the Battle of Waterloo, he's beaten for good. His final stop was St. Helena, just a remote rock in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and that's where he died in 1821. And so the man who had been the master of an entire continent ended his life on a lonely island, thousands of miles away from everything he had built and then lost. It really was the end of an entire era. Which leaves us with the big, lingering question about his legacy, doesn't it? Was he a revolutionary hero who dragged Europe into the modern age with new laws and ideas? Or was he a power-hungry tyrant whose ambition caused the deaths of millions? You know, maybe the real answer is that he was both, a figure just as complex and full of contradictions as the history he helped create.